If you can handle brown vegetables, you can handle them.
I haven't had any other today.
So what is your name? Shirley.
Yeah, they're better
I'm a
now.
Von Spreading.
You,
Oh, are you?
Yeah, underneath I'm a Von Spreading.
Are you related to her?
Sometimes I want to. But I think I am.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
no.
No?
Tom?
You can't hear me?
It's not the microphone, we're hearing you, but not the
Did you know
microphone.
about?
Turning it on?
That helps.
Sorry. All right, can everybody hear me now? Okay, sorry, I'm having technical difficulties. Sue is saying.
So, yeah.
So, I just want to welcome everybody to Round Lunch today. I know we're really low in numbers. We have a group of people over at the other building because we're having a tour of students from the summer reading program. They're Andrew students, I believe, so some of our people are over there and some of our people are at Garden Club. That always takes a lot of our people. So anyway, glad that those of you who are here. We appreciate that. We have no cards going around today. Guess we don't know of any birthdays. And other than the announcement of the kids at the other building. But I do want to tell you something that hopefully you'll be interested in that I got to do yesterday that was wonderful. I got to go to Iowa City to take a tour of the Stead Family Children's Hospital. There is absolutely out of this world wonderful. If you haven't been there, all the walls around, everything is circular, there's no corners, everything is light and gardens and color coordinated for kids, and it's just the most extraordinary, beautiful place. It's full of different kinds of art. There's all kinds of mosaics. There's all kinds of everything. Everything is pretty much, children's related, as you would think. Absolutely, absolutely beautiful place. I got to go to the laboratories where the scientists work and where they do their experimenting. This is because they have a little grandson that's really in need of them. He has a very rare disease and they are working on this and they're making amazing gains already in their research. So it's very exciting for me to get to meet the scientists that Stead's hired to work on. It's called Niemann-Pick C, and it has to do with cholesterol that builds up in it. It affects your liver and your kidneys, and he's only 2, probably not going to be 5. It's very sad. So we're very hopeful. But it was a wonderful experience, and it's just wonderful to know that a couple people like Mary Joy and Jerry Stead, who you all know, who grew up in Maquoketa and went to school in Maquoketa, etc., not only have become so successful, but are so very generous. And you all know projects in Maquoketa that they have given so generously to. They gave a huge sum of money for us for the Clinton Engine building because Mary Joy Kloppenberg's father, Mary Joy Stead's father, George Kloppenberg, worked here. He was a comptroller for Clinton Engine, a good friend of Dee Thomas that we're going to talk about today. And anyway, it was a wonderful experience for me to get to go there and hear these scientists talk about their research projects and how they're moving into mice studies and that sort of thing before. Anyway, it was wonderful. But many, many thanks to Mary Joy Stead and Jerry Stead for their generosity and for that wonderful, wonderful hospital that they made possible for all of us. It's certainly one of the defining points. And it's so beautiful because it kind of sits up on a hill and it's all rounded and everything is windows and you can look out over all of the beautiful buildings from the University of Iowa and the trees and the landscape in it. It's just awesome. And the football field. Yes, it's right there by
Wave.
Yeah. Oh, and thank you, Kathy. They have something that they're very proud of now, and that's the wave. And I guess during football games now, they look up at the Children's Hospital and wave at the children. And so we got to, I have pictures, I should be showing you those pictures. Not that there were people down there waving, but you would see it all. Anyway, I hope you get to go there. I hope you get to tour that wonderful, wonderful facility. Just a credit to, I think, to Macocata, because that's where it all began, right? Okay, so it's just kind of a coincidence that we're talking about Don Thomas today, and I want to thank Sue for saving me with the program. We think, we're not done yet, but we think she saved me. So today we were going to talk about not Clinton Engine itself, but Don Thomas, the man who founded Clinton Engine, who made all of this happen, and who did so much, touched every life in this whole tri-state area, for sure. So this is how Bob Melville, and I always go back to some of his editorials because he had such a wonderful way of words, but this is how he characterized his good friend Don Thomas. These were remarks that he made at Don Thomas's death in 1995. Hard-charging Michigan entrepreneur who founded the Clinton Engine Company and built it into a worldwide leader in its field and gave Macocata its biggest ever industry and employer. And so today we're just going to kind of talk a little bit about Don Thomas the man. Like I said, he did so much for this area, and I think it's important that this story be told because it'll be added to our compendium of Jackson County history. So I think it needs to be retold so that it can be found there. The things that I've included here, we don't have a lot of photos, but the things that I've included come from his memoirs, from visits that I had with his 3 children, and from talking about lots of folks who knew him and who worked with him. Did you know Don Thomas, Jack? Did you ever meet him? Did you, Roger? I just wondered if there was anybody here. I mean, time is going by if there was anyone here. I talked to people like Bill Lucky, for instance, who was a main player here, and he was coming to visit us this week, but then his daughter got COVID, so he's coming in a couple weeks. Don Thomas, Eddie Ports, Don Castile, Onita Weary from the Decker House that you all remember. Those are people who knew him well personally, and so have a little different perspective of his life. And in 2008, when we were putting together the things for this museum, it opened in 2008, we received a large box from Don Thomas's son, John. And he was here for our grand opening. It was August 2008. And in that box, he gave us some wonderful artifacts that we have up in the museum and stacks of papers. And it was interesting, when we went through all of these papers, they were many, many pages of various drafts and copies of a story that Don Thomas was trying to write about his own life. And it seems that many people throughout his life had been trying to get him to write his story, and he was very passionate about writing his story. He wanted to tell people why he felt he was so successful. He wanted to tell them in hopes that it would make them think and give them ideas that it would expand their opportunities. But, and this is hard for me to understand, it was a daunting and frustrating task for Don Thomas to be able to write his story. It was difficult for him to put his thoughts on paper, and that was because of his lack of education. And he died in 1995, leaving his book unfinished. So we had various versions, and they all had to be kind of, put together. It was, wow. And so John Thomas, which is his second son, this is John Thomas, second son of Don and Nellie. He came to Macocata, of course, with his dad. He worked at Clinton Engine for some time. And he started his own business here, and I'm not sure just what that was, but it was kind of in junction with, kind of complemented, went along with Clinton Engine. And then when the Thomas family left Clinton Engine, John too left. And when he went away, he became very successful. He opened up what became a very large company, and he kind of was pioneering the shredding of important documents, legal documents for banks and for attorneys and for large corporations, and he was just in, maybe nationwide, I know, in many states with his corporation. So he became very successful in his own right after he left Clinton Engine. But then he retired. He retired to Clinton, Michigan, and when he retired, he taught himself sculpting, and he became a sculptor. he's been commissioned to do many pieces. A lot of, they were of course big University of Michigan fans because that's where they lived, where they came from, where they went back to. And this is one that he did of the legendary coach there that they were all very, very good friends with. Mitch and I were able to go visit all of the Thomas family there. And we went to his home and we got to see his studio where he did his sculpting and a lot of the different pieces that he made. But if you can, sometime upstairs we have the sculpture that he did of his father. And there he is. And that sculpture he donated to the museum, and it is upstairs in the little office back there. He also did busts of his mother. And that is up there too. That was donated by one of the nephews. And it's unfortunate we can't put them together because they're at different times of their life and they're kind of different sizes, and so they just kind of don't go together. But they're both in the room upstairs. And he was just was and is, John Thomas, a very, very interesting man. And he's the reason that we finally have Don Thomas's book, because in June of 2016, he finally got this all put together and he published his father's story. And we received one of the books for our collection, and then he gave us permission to reprint as many books as we want. Donald Dee Thomas, My Life Story. And so we can reprint this as often as we want, and the money all goes to the museum. So it's kind of an interesting book to read, but it's the story of his life, and we're going to talk a little about that today. And this is a wonderful book for us to have because it complements the two books that Betty Miller wrote about Pitt Mansion, the one from the beginning in 1950 to when Don Thomas left in 1959, and then the second book from the next year to the end. Anyway, so we have two wonderful books about Pitt Mansion, thanks to Betty Miller. So to start at the beginning, we have a slide of Don Thomas's parents. He was born in Michigan in 1909. His family was very religious, and he's often stated that his faith was the most important thing in his life. And though these people were very, very poor, and it was quite a large family, his father sold his best, it was a dairy farm, and his father sold his best dairy cow to contribute to the building of the first little one-room schoolhouse in the area and for their little Methodist country church, where he was the Sunday school superintendent for over 25 years. So, and Don Thomas in his book talks a lot about how living and growing up in that tiny rural community did a lot to make him the man that he became. And he said he learned to work not for personal gain, but for the better good of all. And that close social life just motivated him. He kind of fed on that. And his experiences there, he said, taught him to follow through on an idea. Once he had an idea, he followed through with it. And he said he treasures the memories of the men getting together there to cut blocks of ice from the rivers in the wintertime and pack them in the ice house where they would last until summer. And he could remember them all making the delicious ice creams and lemonades that they would have all through the summer. But this tight-knit community where everybody worked together and he so enjoyed, then he could reap the rewards of the great impressions that made upon him. So, Don's parents, like we said, were dairy farmers, and they lived in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. He had two brothers, Russell and June, J-U-N-E, and they were 8 and 10 years older than him. He also had an adopted sister that was married, and that sister had a little boy about his age, and that they were kind of isolated. And that became, that little boy living on the next adjoining farm became his best friend. But he always told the story, and does in the book, about how he learned to work. He learned to work at an early age. And he says he was never made to work, but he was praised for his good work and the contribution that he made to the farm that just made him want to work harder and harder. And he said as early as 4 years old, he had chores. And he talks about how, and you can imagine how cold it was in the Upper Peninsula in the middle of the winter in an old dairy farm. He talked about how at 4 in the morning, at 4 years of age, went out to the barns with his family and when they milked the cows. And his first job was to clean the glass globes from the kerosene lanterns in the barn that his family used while they were milking. And they taught him that the success of that farm depended on how well he cleaned those glass things so that they could see to get the cows milked and get their work done. And that just made a lasting impression upon him. He said when he was 6 years old, his mother taught him to herd the cattle. And he brought them every morning and night to or from the pasture. And he remembered that he would shout and sing because he was afraid of any wild animals that he might encounter along the way in the woods, because it was a very rural area. But he remembers too, as he walked along the ridge and he could look out over the bay to the peninsula where his ancestors had come in the 1850s when they had come to this country. And so that too made a real impression upon him. He said that back then there were 7 Thomas brothers, and of course his dad would have been one of the 7, and that they owned many, many acres in the Upper Peninsula. And he was always very nostalgic about that area. His mother had come from Old Mission, and she had been a school teacher there before she married. And he remembers the stories that she always told him about the Indians in the area, and how they would come and they would collect gifts and anything and people would give them things to avoid trouble. And he just remembers those Indians. And he didn't say this, but I was wondering if maybe that became the reason that he had the Clinton engine arrowhead. And a lot of the products that he made had Indian or Native American names, the chief and things like that. So maybe that's where that all came from. We don't really know. But the stories that his mother told him and his memories of the Indians up there. So as he was growing up, his mother had a huge truck garden, and he helped her sell vegetables at the roadside stand and to take the produce and the butter they churned to market in Traverse City, Michigan. And I'm sure that this was because his brothers were 8 and 10 years older. They were out working in the fields and things, and he was the one helping his mother in the truck garden with all of the vegetables. He said the first thing he remembered in the spring was the horseradish. And they would grind the horseradish and they would sell it at the market. And he said they always sold out of horseradish. And then they had the whole summer of vegetables, and after the vegetables are gone, then it would be time to do the fruits and things from the orchards that they had. The fruits would all have to be picked and taken to market. The family would then buy turkey eggs, and they would hatch those turkey eggs in the barn. And when the flocks of young turkeys were of a certain age, they would just be turned loose into the wild to fend for themselves. That way it cost the family, very poor, cost them nothing to raise all those turkeys, because they lived off grasshoppers and bugs and grasses and berries, and they just raised themselves. Then in the fall, they would take binoculars. Well, they would use binoculars to keep track of the flocks, to be sure that everything was going okay. And then just before Thanksgiving, they would round up all these turkeys. And he talked about what a chore it was to find all these turkeys out in the wild. But they'd get all the turkeys together and they would butcher them and sell them, and that was another huge source of income for them. So what he has done here, he credits the value that he had, the values that he had, and the work ethic that he had as what made him the man that he became to be. These early experiences in Michigan. And you know, as we talk about this, who does that remind you of that was in Lakota? Perhaps Robert Millikan, right? Robert Millikan, who grew up to be this world-class, wonderful, great scientist, had very similar experiences growing up. He lived down by the Baptist Church off West Platte Street, right, between there and the river. And he had to help his mother in the garden. He raised chickens as a boy and sold chickens and sold the eggs and things like that. He learned to work very hard. He had this same work ethic that Don Thomas had that probably made him the man that he was. And then both of them were heavily involved in the church. Of course, Robert Milton's father was the pastor of the Congregational Church, that's the UCC church that's there now. But all of those things, when he thought back, were what was responsible for his success. So this is a picture of Don Thomas and his father. This picture was taken in 1910. 5 years after that, May 1st of 1915, their life changed because his father saw a newspaper headline in the paper in Michigan proclaiming that Henry Ford would pay $5 a day for 8 hours of work in his car factory. Well, immediately they began to plan how they were going to get to Detroit to earn all of that big money. His father had an auction, sold off all the dairy cows, all the stock on the farm, sold off all the equipment. They paid down the mortgage so that they could move on. And he talks about seeing his father cry as his father sold his beautiful team of draft horses, of work horses. His father left Detroit, and Don and his mother were left there to finish up and run the farm until it was time for them to move on, until they could join him. And then he tells a funny story about their move to the big city, he and his mom moving into the big city. And he said, being a country woman, Mom rolled all of their belongings in a mattress of old quilts that were sewn together. Put everything inside that, rolled it up, tied ropes around it, so that two of them could carry that mattress onto the train, which was taking them into Detroit. And he said that was a very, very embarrassing thing for him that he never quite forgot. But he gave his mother great credit, said she always taught him around the dinner table. Their conversations around the dinner table were a great source. Remember, he had very little education, but they were a great source of learning for him. Conversations, discussions, heated arguments. And he said that there was always a running commentary on World War I, because that was the time, and the early rumblings of the labor union, which you know affected him greatly as the years went by. But he said it provided a channel that captured the undercurrents and the significant cultural changes that were evolving all around him. He was part of this thing taking place when the agricultural society was turning to an industrial society. So he said that was really good training for him later in life. He was just part of that, and he saw all of that happening. So then about this time, he said, they got settled there. His father signed him up for trade school. He wanted him to learn a trade so that he could take care of himself and for himself. So he learned the masonry trade, and a trade which he says he fell back on many times in his life. Before he had even graduated from high school, he was earning money with his building skills. He got a contract erecting some simple office buildings, then a contract putting basements under existing homes, adding garages to existing homes or maybe porches. This was all when he was still in high school. He was doing this. And he said, as he analyzed his circumstances, he decided that all he could say about himself was that his success was that and this is on his sign in his little room up there, everything I have touched has been with enthusiasm. I have this terrible enthusiasm. I want to get into everything. I want to know all about it. And I think that is what makes people do things. So then, the time now is 1925. 15 years after the Wright brothers did their thing with airplanes, long before Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic. Don Thomas by now was in the 11th grade in high school, still determined to learn everything. And through a friend, he became connected with a man by the name of Professor Altman from the University of Detroit. He was part of their aerodynamic engineering department. And he and this friend got this professor to help them to design an airplane that they could build to sell. They raised the money. They got him to help them design this plane, of course. Then they raised the money, they got all the materials that they needed to build this, which they kept in a building that they rented on Atwater Street in Detroit. And it just happened that it was right across the street from where Henry Ford built his first Model T car. All this is sinking into his mind. They built the plane, they tested it, they had to hire a pilot to fly it. But all the time that he did this, he was going to school, he was playing football, he was working on his housing business, and he had a girlfriend. All of this, and he was 17 years old. Well, they built the plane flew beautifully. It only went 90 miles an hour, but that was perfect for training purposes. It was made as a training plane. They advertised, they sold rides at all fairs and everywhere they could. Sold rides for $5 for 5 minutes. But planes were really novel then, I mean, they were new. And people thought it was wonderful that they could fly. So they came from all over to fly to ride in these planes. He hired a parachutist. They gave entertainment. They gave lessons so people could learn to fly. And this became a really big business for him. He called it the Capital Aircraft Corporation. This was his baby. So he met a man with a lot of money and political power by the name of Harry Hiddle. And they formed Don's second corporation, the Capital Aircraft Corporation. So now, he's 17 years old, he owns 2 corporations, right? He was the president, his dad, close family, his dad was the vice president, and Harry Hiddle was the secretary. They sold stock in this company. They raised money. They built more planes. Then Don Thomas took a short business trip to New York. And when he returned, his plans had changed drastically because there were some men from North Detroit that came out to his plant while he was gone, and they told his father and his brother that it was illegal, and it probably was, for a 17-year-old to sell shares of stock in a corporation. And he was the president of the company doing this, and they told his father that they were going to close down his business and they were going to put him in prison, Don in prison, if there was not an immediate change. But they would do them a favor by buying this company. And so when Don got back from his business trip, you know, there weren't cell phones then. When Don got back from his business trip, he no longer owned the Capital Aircraft Corporation. So, that was kind of the end of that. So, Don married Nellie, the love of his life. Nellie was a nurse, but Nellie was out of work because of the Depression. There just was no money to pay anybody, and things were really bad. So, as time went on, they had 4 children, and a lot of the pages of his book, they're very interesting because they tell of all of these clever things that they did to manage to survive during the Depression. And the Depression there, I think, was maybe a little worse than it was here. I mean, we were a farming community. There was food, there were things. Up there, he was in Detroit, huge city, no jobs. Things were much rougher, I think, for people in big cities. But if there's one thing that Don was, he was creative. And he had the ingenuity that it took to be successful. So he decided that he would acquire a gas station. There were businesses closed all over everywhere. And you could just go sign a few papers without any money and take over a business. So he started out with 1 gas station. And he had no supplies to do, or he had no money to do anything with, but he had a contract with a gasoline company that furnished him gasoline on credit. And so he would use that to barter for supplies. He'd go to the lumber yard, and they would trade him wood for gasoline, for their trucks and things like that. And then he'd build these stations up, and he would add services, because to him, everything was about service, all the extra services. And like checking the air in the tires for free, check air in everybody's tires. And then he'd sell tires, right? But he'd get these tires because he'd barter with the tire companies. So he quickly developed a relationship with B.F. Goodrich, and that proved to be very lucrative to him. They did all kinds of schemes to advertise and to make money. Nellie gave away she made flyers and attached them to a clothespin and put them on people's cars and clotheslines and all over, left them on porches to advertise free glasses. You got a free glass if you bought 7 gallons of gas. People needed a free glass during the Depression, I'm sure. So they sold lots and lots. They had car washes. They had everything you can imagine to bring people into their gas stations, all kinds of come-ons. And again, service was the name of the game. Because of their great customer service, their business grew quickly. So they would then sell that station, had to be at a profit because they paid nothing for it. So they would sell that gas station, and they'd buy another one that closed, or they'd build a new one. But again, they bartered their way along. He did all this with other people's money by, he didn't have any money. So the only time, and I love this story, the only time that he was not able to get everything he needed for one of his service stations, he took over a service station, and either it had or he added service bays. There were 7 service bays. And when he had everything done, he was ready to open. He had everything he needed, but he wasn't able to barter for doors to close those bay service stations so that he could close up at night. So clever as ever, he just hired his father to work there at night, the night shift, and he became the first 24-hour gas station in the whole place. So he always found a way. Whoops. Oh, sorry. I didn't. Nope, that's fine. I forgot this one. This is he and his gas stations, and he had over time. I think maybe it's kind of hard to tell. I think maybe he had 7 different stations over time. But this is Don Thomas, and he always had his brother-in-law and different people working in some of the gas stations that he took over and brought back to life, and then resold for a big profit. Okay, so now the next one. Okay, the next one. Sorry. Yep. Okay, so this is the Thomas metal extractor. So he was always thinking, and his gas stations were doing well. So in his mind, there was a need for this. He began experimenting with metal disintegrating equipment because he saw a need. And anybody who wants to be successful and sell anything, first they have to establish their need for it. If people don't need it, they're not going to buy it. But if you establish the need and you have the product, then people will buy it. He saw a need. And as he worked with cars and as he was working with airplanes and things like that, he saw that it was almost impossible to remove the screws and the studs that they used in putting these metal cars and things together. Once you took it out to fix it, you took out the screws so you could fix something, you ruined the metal that went with it. So he was trying to solve that, and he invented the Thomas metal extractor. He patented it, and soon after he found that the government wanted to purchase many of these for repairing aircraft. So he began manufacturing these metal extractors and selling them to the government and lots of other people. He also, so that kind of got him started in the manufacturing. Okay, questions? Questions for Sue? All right, questions?
I want to know, from Michigan to here, how did you know about the polka dot?
Okay, so he was having such a hard time in Clinton, Michigan, because of the utilities, because of the unions. He was out of space, and there was one other reason I can't think of. Always 4 reasons for coming here. But he came here because, he would look at what was available, and there was a 14-acre manufacturing site sitting here empty, because Art Depew had built this with government backing to do things for the war effort. When the war wound down, he moved, it was too big for him. He moved back to Comanche, Clinton area, and he is the owner of Central Steel Tube, that's still in business today. But that left a large manufacturing site with a wonderful, for that time, foundry out in the corner. Don Thomas needed a foundry to manufacture his engines, so that was a big drawing point. So as he researched, he found out about the work ethic of our farmers, and he came here, and really, it was the first time that farmers in our area at least came into town and worked the factory shift, and then farmed around that factory shift. So that was a big change in our area when those jobs all became so.
Okay.
Okay.
So, sisters,
Yes.
do you remember what year he passed?
1995.
And what year did his wife pass?
It was earlier, but no, it was later. But I do not know. I mean, I know somewhere, but I don't know my head.
Well, I had the privilege of meeting his wife and his daughter Donna. Because
Okay.
They were great friends with Don and Ruth Castile.
Yes.
And because of the area up there in Farman, when Don and Ruthie lived at Clover Ridge, they come to visit. Donna brought her mother.
Oh.
What a lovely lady.
Hey, thank you for that. Thank you for adding that. And it was Don Castile that helped him through his cattle raising.
Yes.
I mean, he knew about
Right.
dairy cattle, but he didn't know about raising cattle. So thank you. It was Don Castile
Don Castile that
Yeah.
actually worked with them.
that ran his operation
Yeah, it was.
at the T-Bar
Yeah,
Ranch.
sure was. Yeah.
And his daughter Donna Service, that she
Yeah.
mentioned, they lived at the T-Bar Ranch.
Yes, they did.
And they actually lived there when it burned.
Yes.
So
Where was the farm? Was it close to Emmeline? Was it you?
it's where Wildwood Acres is now.
I can't.
They can,
Right
where the
by
bridge
Canton.
are.
Right by Canton?
Yeah,
Turn right just before you go across the bridge.
Right.
yes.
And it was the T-Bar Ranch.
She already.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Did you say anything about Sunday?
I did not say anything about Sunday. Thank you. Sunday. I have 9 grandchildren at my house, 4 extra dogs.
Oh my.
I'm just not thinking today. Sunday, thank you, Jack, very important. Sunday at the other museum on the fairgrounds, the county museum, from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock, we're having a Gene Buckner get-together. And people from the Peace Pipe Players are coming to talk a little bit about some of the wonderful things she did for them through the years. We hope that all of you will come, anybody who has memories that they would like to share of Gene Buckner, and also then while you're at the museum, look at some of the beautiful things that she has done for the Historical Society at that museum. Her fingerprints are all over that building. Her artwork, some of the things that she's done, and many of the things that Native American artifacts and things like that that she's donated. She was just such an important part of our organization. So thank you.
And she also asked that the memorials come here.
She did. All of her memorials she asked to come here. We're very grateful for that. And the same with Joy Eads, and we miss Joy Eads. So, thank you very much. Thank you for reading.